All right, it is the top of the hour. Thank you everybody for joining today's webinar, Locate, Analyze, and Plan Tips for Migration Success. We appreciate you joining us today. And the first thing I'd like to do is just take a second to introduce our speakers. My name is Shana Horka and I work in product marketing here at Gimel. I am joined by our key speakers today, Gimel's Vice Chairman, David Quackenbush, Gimel Solutions Architect, John Kuvion, and we are very excited to have Jordan Uytterhagen, who is the Managing Director at Cadence Solutions. Now, before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. We'll answer, I believe the format is as they come in, and we'll also keep some time at the end for additional Q&A if we have time for it. There will be at least one poll question that you'll see pop up. All answers are anonymous, so please keep an eye out for that. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. So to kick things off, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Gimel, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jordan so he can do a very brief introduction of Cadence Solutions for those who are not familiar. So to kick things off, I have a couple of slides here to tell you a little bit about how Gimel can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Gimel is an information governance software company founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve information governance goals by providing solutions that help you balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimel can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimel's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions, as you can see on the screen, include migration from legacy systems, which we're going to be talking a little bit about today, file analysis and e-discovery, electronic and physical records management, and document management for SAP. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jordan so he can do an introduction of Cadence Solutions.
Thank you, Shana. So a bit about Cadence and who this guy is going to be speaking a bit today. Quite simply, we're an organization, company that helps North American organizations struggling with digital transformation. We've been around since 2013. We've completed over 65 projects for both public sector, private sector, government, energy, and utilities. And we have a number of industry-leading software partnerships. And the one piece about us that's a little bit different than most implementers and maybe even some of the Gimel partners is I founded the company after going through a very poor implementation, which included a migration. I'll speak a bit about that today. And Cadence Solutions was really born out of necessity as a customer turned implementer. Next slide, please, John. So a bit about our alliances. We're partnered with 4 major players in the software community: Microsoft, SAP, OpenText, and of course, Gimel, all in the information management space. So with Microsoft, of course, that's SharePoint and Power Apps and Teams. With Gimel, that's any of the products previously mentioned by Shana, everything around governance, migration, even the SAP archiving side of things. With SAP, it's accounts payable, vendor invoice management, and with OpenText, it's the traditional ECM platforms.
Okay, I'm going to take it from here. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Shana. This is David Quackenbush, and want to walk through the format of our session today. We're going to do this as a roundtable discussion with a couple of our experts, Jordan being one of them, and John Kuvion, the other from Gimel, and really kind of get into what we see as a pretty hot topic today across most of our client scenarios, and that is in the midst of all this digital transformation, IT simplification, IT modernization, name the big program that's being established today in the corporate universe and even in the government universe as well, content migrations are becoming a larger and more complicated and more problematic part of these activities. And I think everyone's familiar with migrations for a very long period of time. And now the thing is, how do you do migrations, and how can we learn from experts and best practices for making a migration successful, not only in technically successful, but more importantly, functionally successful, so that when the data is landing in the new system of choice, it's the right data with the right structure that really accelerates adoption and usability of that content in the new environment. So this is what we're going to cover in our conversation today: issues and mistakes, getting started with migration, talking a little bit about the big topic of lift and shift type migrations versus more transformative migrations, and then ultimately wrapping up with making it work. Like Shana said, I'd recommend, if you have questions along the way, to throw them in the chat, and we will try to address them as part of the dialogue with this esteemed group that's going to be discussing some of their experiences and best practices with migrations. So getting started, let's jump into the first category of discussion around common issues and mistakes. And Jordan, I'm going to throw this to you to get us started. You mentioned it at the beginning of your introduction. And so what do you find, or what have you found throughout your history is really the most challenging aspect of migrating to a Microsoft 365 environment?
Yeah, I think one of the more common pitfalls we walk into as an implementer, pardon me, to the migration side of things. Do you know your data before we're attempting to even move it or cleanse it? So recently we helped a large insurance provider do a many terabyte migration, and at the 11th hour of the statement of work being signed, they found a whole new repository with another 12 million documents to be migrated. So that was one of the challenges that we walk into as the implementer is what do you have for data? Are we simply just moving active content? Does legacy content need to be moved, or can that be archived in the legacy system? And as we're positioning all that to migrate into M365 or SharePoint, what does the modeling look like for that information that's going to be transitioning across platforms?
Great, John. Any commentary on your end? What you've experienced? What are some of the challenges, pitfalls that you've run into in migrations to M365?
Yeah, sure, David. The kind of tailing off of that, looking at the fact that Microsoft 365 is going to be a different system altogether than the legacy system you'll be migrating off of, and understanding the differences. And a lot of times people don't spend enough time looking at that inventory of content that they've discovered and now have an understanding of what they're going to do with it when they move it, and the changes that might be necessary to transform that so it could be supported in a Microsoft platform. Not a lot of people understand that some older legacy platforms will allow you to do things that Microsoft won't. So paying attention to those differences in the platforms is always something that can be challenging, and if you don't plan for that, it can make things rough overall on the implementation.
Great. Yeah, thanks. By the way, I messed things up a little bit. I meant to start our conversation with a poll question. So let's flip back to that real quick and get a poll of the audience just to see who's out there and what their experience has been. It's a pretty simple poll question to get the ball rolling, but out there, who's been involved with the content migration before, And if so, if you have, what have your results been, or what have you seen yourself? Please answer that, and we'll use the results here in a couple of minutes to carry on with our conversation. Right, so getting back to the topic at hand, common issues and mistakes, while we're waiting for some of the poll results. What are some examples of things, one of the things that is kind of funny, I was in a conversation the other day with a client, and there's things that just seem to come up in migrations that are, I don't know, they were kind of foreign to me at points, like talking about transferring user permissions and user rights and things like that from certain legacy ECM systems, and maybe even things like workflows and other things like that. Jordan, any thoughts around that? Is that something that gets overlooked oftentimes when planning for a migration? How have you seen that affect getting one of these things off the ground?
Yeah, I think you stole a bit of my thunder there, David. The workflow aspect of migrating between two platforms or migrating into M365 is a big conundrum when you actually go to perform the cutover of systems. So when you do a migration, we know we can move a lot of legacy stuff in advance of a go live. Once we're live, we may have active workflows in the legacy system that need to wrap up. Do we let those wrap up in the legacy system first? Do we transition the workflow process over to the new system in 365? And how does that interact as a part of our transition and our migration? So you may end up, in all likelihood, with two platforms running parallel for a period of time until those business processes kind of wrap up in the old system and engage net new in 365 or wherever you're migrating to. We've done those migrations, as you mentioned, David, from OpenText into Microsoft, and the permission model is one of those areas that is definitely a pain point. The permission models are nowhere near the same. It's not an easy thing to migrate, and when you start talking about security clearance levels, in-depth permissions, even you get into some groups, if Active Directory was used or not used, those are other pitfalls and things that really need to be analyzed. So the devil's really in the details as you get into those types of activities, and it does require a thorough discussion before you start to consider the project.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I think that's a good perspective. Here's our poll results. So it looks like we've got a nice diverse group here, some with good success conducting their own migrations. Some have had some challenges, and some are getting ready to go through it maybe for the first time. So a good cross-section of experience out there to draw from. Let's, John, while we wrap this section up, Kuvion, any other thoughts or pointers, tips that you might provide for someone that's getting ready to do a migration before they just jump right in and start working?
Yeah, I think Jordan kind of nailed this in his first response, and that really is around understanding the inventory of content that you're working with. You really have to have a good understanding of what you're going to be working with, and that's something that we have a tool. We have our analysis and discovery tool that can help with that. But really, you've got to understand, what your content is. If your content is, for example, in content server, what categories and attributes are being used? What's the model look like? What does the security look like? What is the overall picture of your data? And that's important to get started, because until you do that, you really are going to be flying blind, and your planning is going to be well short of what it needs to be in order to do your migration.
Okay, great. This just popped into my head. So what about any thoughts, either one, Jordan or John, on underestimating what it really takes, the time it actually takes to move payloads from some former source system to a Microsoft 365 environment?
I can take a stab at that first, John.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. It's underestimated quite frequently. One of the recent experiences we had was one of our clients' upload pipe was ridiculously small for the size of organization. We're talking, 25 megabits up. So when you start to hit bandwidth thresholds and the pipe is simply too small to move enough content from an on-premise legacy system up into a cloud-hosted environment, you start running into all kinds of logistics nightmares. So something that's completely overlooked, if you're working with business units and business departments, they don't think of that stuff, right? That's not their job. That's an IT infrastructure job. So that's one that's common. Another one that I've run into in the past was we're actually migrating out of a system called GroupWise. It's very legacy. It housed both email and documents and records. So you're essentially decoupling business functions as you're migrating. So you need to pull the email out, and that goes off into Exchange or now 365, and you need to pull the documents out and push that off into SharePoint Online. The problem with that is you're disrupting both your email function in your organization as well as your document management function at the same time. So again, logistics nightmares as you start to go into a go live scenario. John, any comments?
Yeah. Something that's always underestimated or I guess maybe along those lines is people will try to bite off too big of a bite of the apple at one time. These things take time, and you've got to understand that it's going to take time to do these kinds of migrations especially when you've got a lot of data. So, the recommendation from us is always to try to start small, at least have some initial successes while you're developing your plan and your process. Don't try to boil the ocean, and take it one step at a time so that you can refine that process. Along the lines of what you were saying, Jordan, about bandwidth issues, I can say that we see that a lot too, and in order to help with some of that, we've got specific tooling in our migration products that take advantage and leverage some of the newest functionality that M365 offers with respect to migrations and the use of their migration API for bulk loading, because we do see that. And in addition to bandwidth at a customer site, you've also got the idea and the problem of Microsoft throttling your connection to make sure that you're not overloading your SharePoint Online tenant, for example. But those are two things I would add to that.
Excellent. That's a good, I think that's sort of a good starter to get us into, some of the challenges. Now let's talk about getting started, and maybe as a part of the getting started, I'm going to go ahead and address a question that we've received. It's certainly a part of getting started in my perspective, which is the question here is, what techniques or technologies have you used to get rid of rot prior to a migration? So when I think of migrations and getting started, the first thing that you normally are going to do is really kind of understand what you're migrating and what you're not migrating, and certainly rot has an element there. So Jordan, any thoughts there?
Yeah, on the rot side of things, I think that's going to depend on where you're coming from, Sue, in terms of a system. Is it a structured system? Are we talking file shares? There's many file share utilities that can do the cleanup and that. I touched on it earlier. Are we just bringing active and ongoing documents and records? Are we leaving some of that stuff, the archival stuff behind? That's an organizational decision, but techniques to do that and tools, yeah, there's a ton out there. Techniques, we want to avoid the army of people cleaning things by all means.
Yeah, I guess just to be clear, although the audience appeared to be pretty knowledgeable, ROT meaning redundant, obsolete, and trivial information, try to avoid not spelling out acronyms whenever I can, because there's so many of them. John, does it, one of the things that that we've done in the past with Gimel Migrate is we've used the analysis tool to identify some of that rot, as part of the planning activity prior to setting up the migration. Anything to show or any thoughts on that that particular piece?
Yeah, sure. I can pull that up real quick. We've got a couple of ways to analyze content using some of our tools. First one is our Discovery and Analytics tool, which really is focused on understanding the content so you can prepare. It's all about investigation and understanding kind of what you're starting with, and it gives you some ability to look at what kind of content you have, what type of MIME types, what different file types you have, what type of metadata is being used in your containers, and you can even use it to generate reports around aging. And identify long paths, for example, which would be a problem if you're going to migrate to M365. You got to be aware that there's going to be some path limitations, and then uncovering things like what's the security model look like, so that you can help plan to transition that to your target in M365, and a little bit of deduplication reporting, so you can understand where you do have some duplication. But that's one of two ways, and another way that we have is we can generate data and reports out of our export tools that can give you the ability to do some more advanced reporting on that data, and then actually cut and slice and dice your content based on some of that category and attribute information that you've learned in your source system to help plan for your migration. So these are two of the common tools that we use in some of our migrations.
Okay, cool, thanks. I'll just add a third. So if you think about ROT, and again, I think from a getting started perspective, the whole idea is really kind of understanding what it is you want to migrate versus what it is you don't want to migrate. As part of that planning exercise, there's a variety of other tools out there that can help identify that. We have our own called Gimel Discover that really allows you to do deep analysis of content in preparation for some kind of action, whether that be total remediation, could be prior to a migration, could be just reorganization of something like a file share. So I think those are, and I think there's other tools out there as well that do similar things. So I think there's certainly pretty important as part of a migration activity when you're getting started to think about, what kind of content analysis is needed as part of that exercise as you're preparing to set up the migration. Any thoughts before we're going through these pretty quick now? We're pretty tight on time, but any thoughts real quick on what's the best way to get started with the migration? Because it can be a pretty overwhelming task when you're thinking about, multi-terabyte types of migrations. Jordan?
Yeah, we try to get something out of the legacy system and pushed into the new system. And I know Sue had a question there on taxonomy and, what does the target look like when we do a migration? So the best place to start is to go end to end with a small volume of data. If you can do that, then you know that you can scale up and you're into more of a logistics and maybe a few pitfalls with data quality. But the best place to start is to try to get it end to end with a small volume of data first.
Makes sense. We hear that. question a lot from our clients in terms of, what they would describe as a pilot or something like that to get the ball rolling. All right, I'm going to move on for purposes of time because this is really an area that I wanted to make sure we had good conversation around, which is the whole idea of lift and shift migrations versus transformative ones. And I was on a call this morning that we had a client that actually, or a partner, I should say, that was working with a client that they're knee deep in a migration right now. And they took a kind of country by country approach to their migration. And one country group was more transformative and the other was more lift and shift. And there was an interesting compare and contrast around the time, the frustration, and the ultimate results that the client was seeing from taking both approaches. So, Jordan, I'll throw this to you. When you think about lift and shift versus transformative migrations, what are some of the common issues, mistakes that you often encounter when you're talking with a client or working with a client that is wanting to migrate their content?
Yeah, we've been a part of a number of those, David, and I think the pattern that I see is it comes from which department is the request coming from. If this is a business-driven initiative, there's usually the need to transform and change platforms, get up into 365 and maybe change complete wholesale ECM systems. If a lift and shift is occurring, it's typically more IT driven. They have something on premise, it's off warranty on physical hardware, or they don't want to buy any more virtual machine nodes. And they want to just lift that whole thing and move it into the cloud and make it not essentially their hardware or infrastructure issue any longer. Now, down the road, that is going to turn into a transformation project because they're going to move platforms at some point, but it does mitigate the immediate concern or risk of legacy hardware infrastructure being on premise. So that's what we've seen a lot of, and it's really who's driving the initiative. Is it a business-driven efficiency project, or is this, risk mitigation from an IT side of things?
John, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I agree with what Jordan said there. And on top of that, I know we try to encourage people to take the opportunity while they're going through this change, because a lot of times there's a lot of change involved, and change management is a big piece of the puzzle when they're going through these migrations. But take the opportunity to do some things, to make some transformations, to redesign some things while they're moving their data, instead of just lifting and cramming it into a different system and making it look identical, or re-implementing the exact same model. And that could include things like making sure that your permissions are valid in the new system, but also taking the time to look at the metadata that you have on this content and make sure that the way that you're putting it into the new system still makes sense and provides business value for today. Because a lot of times these systems that are being replaced are ancient, and maybe that doesn't supply much value today. And taking the time to address that in the new system can add value to that content while you're doing the migration, instead of just ramming it into the new system the exact way that it is in your legacy system.
Cool. Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. So here's a quick one for you. Either one of you, any techniques that you use to help a client recognize that lift and shift, while expedient, may not really be a good choice for them in a migration?
That one's for me, I assume.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's, do you want to do two projects versus one, is how we always approach that conversation.
Yep.
And if we're doing a true transformation, again, we need that business buy-in. If they're not buying in immediately, or it's not a priority for them, unfortunately, you're kind of stuck. But that's the approach is, how many times do you want to do this? Do you want to You want to renovate first and then build a new house, or should we just start building a new house now?
Yeah, great point. I couldn't agree more. Always seems the expedient approach, which is what a lot of clients really think they want to do, always is fraught with that kind of doing it twice versus doing it right the first time. All right, so we're pretty much running out of time. I'm going to go a little bit over because we're recording this. Those that can hang around, appreciate you hanging around. But we'll have a recording for this. I wanted to cover the last topic here with Jordan and John in terms of making it work, and really talking about the main question here is when you think about handling migrations and metadata, moving metadata between systems that have different metadata models, what have you seen, what have you done to really make that a smooth and efficient activity? Jordan?
Yeah, to make it as smooth as possible, we dig into the legacy data and literally cross our fingers and hope that nobody put dates into a text field, because that's, you know, the biggest stick of dynamite you can have on a migration project, where you have mismatched data types and you're trying to harden or structure that in the new system, or in our discussion today, 365 or SharePoint Online. So how do we handle that metadata model between the two systems? One, match the structure as closely as possible. Two, make sure that it was not completely unstructured in the previous system. And three, you're kind of golden gooses. If you're coming from a file share and you simply don't have any metadata, you get to start over and build that new place on your own, and define the model, and, you know, pick out metadata fields off the documents as they're migrated, as opposed to transforming what's coming from a legacy system.
Yeah. So John, I'll throw this one to you, but, you know, in my opinion, this is a perfect example of where the work up front, the analysis up front, understanding what metadata you've got in your legacy system that you're transforming, is a critical success factor to setting up the information architecture in M365, and not having it be an afterthought when you get into the final stages of the transformation and realizing that you've got some mismatches there in terms of what you're really wanting to accomplish with your new structure. Any thoughts there, or does it make sense to flip over to the Map It tool?
Yeah, sure.
What that might look like?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and you know, that's why we, if I can pull that up, that's why we have you know, some of the functionality in our tool here that allows us to do log in first. Oh, it's going to really put me through the ringer here.
Lucky you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so, you know, doing that upfront content analysis allows you to really get some visibility into what your metadata looks like, and you know, then once you've got a good handle on that, you know, giving you the capability to come in to a tool like Gimbal Migration, where we allow you to specifically select, you know, metadata columns from the source system and map those into a target content type that you've created in your SharePoint environment. You know, we try to help you get a good picture of what the model needs to be in SharePoint, but really it's up to you to do that. But we give you an advanced tool to be able to select a field in the target and the source and map those together. And then furthermore, to take it a step further and see what what that content's going to look like once it gets put into SharePoint, where it's going to go, and even make wholesale changes in the data as it's transitioning between the source and a target to Microsoft 365 by doing search and replace, filling in blank values, maybe correcting abbreviations and anomalies in the content that you've actually identified. Those are things that you can easily fix before you actually go to do your migration, instead of finding out after the fact and having to go into the database, for example, to make those changes. And then lastly, being able to identify some of those areas where you know it's going to be an issue in SharePoint because you've got a long path, or taking advantage of some capabilities in our tool set to do some restructuring of folders by dragging and dropping them around, or removing them from the migration where you don't want to, you find data that you don't want to remove that is in the source system. So those are some key ways that we help with that scenario.
Great. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. So we are a little bit over. Hopefully this gives everybody on the call. This was a rapid fire conversation. You could spend hours talking about migrations, and everyone knows how much fun it is to talk about migrations, much less do them. Being a little facetious there, of course. I've got one thing to wrap up here with another poll question, and then we'll wrap things up. If there's any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, you know how to reach us. And let us know if you want to hear from us on this poll question about any more information around migrations from Cadence or Gimel. Be happy to follow up for those that are interested in learning more. Again, it's a topic that's front of mind for so many of our clients today, and hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight into some ways to get in front of the curve when you want to do a migration and be successful with it. But encourage you to reach out to Cadence or ourselves if you've got further questions or want additional information. With that, Jordan, I really do appreciate you joining us on this webinar and your insights. Same for you, Mr. Kuvian. And until next time, we appreciate everybody joining, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.